You may not realize it yet, but the moment a woman senses she is losing you, a quiet storm begins within her. It does not announce itself with fanfare or with the loud echoes of drama. It unfolds in subtlety, in the shifting of her gaze, in the measured cadence of her words, in the hesitation before she speaks, and in the sudden emptiness behind gestures that once carried warmth. You notice these shifts not as coincidence, but as the first evidence of a profound internal recalibration, a negotiation of value and loss that occurs in the theater of her mind, far before it ever reaches her voice. Her awareness is not merely emotional. It is a precise, calculated movement of instincts and cognition intertwined, an elegant mechanism designed by evolution to measure attachment, assess risk, and reconcile desire with absence. You observe, perhaps with a sense of unease, that she no longer seeks the same attention, that her laughter carries a distance, that the familiar patterns which once drew you in now flicker with uncertainty. It is in these subtle deviations, these almost imperceptible micro-expressions and tonal shifts, that the truth of her inner world is revealed. When you recognize it, you understand that this is not mere whim or caprice. It is a deeply human response to value, scarcity, and perception. You begin to notice her behavior oscillating between retreat and testing, a subconscious dance in which she measures your presence and your absence alike, and you sense the gravity behind every glance that lingers too long or retracts too quickly. In this moment, you are no longer just an observer. You are the axis around which her thoughts pivot, the invisible anchor that defines the measure of her attention and curiosity. Her internal dialogue, though silent to your ears, is a tapestry of anticipation, calculation, and instinctive longing. She wonders how much space she has allowed to grow between you, and whether that space has become a mirror reflecting the absence she cannot yet articulate. You perceive the tension in her demeanor, a quiet dissonance that is neither aggressive nor overtly tender, but precise in its ambiguity, forcing you to reconcile your assumptions with reality. It is in this space, this delicate equilibrium between presence and absence, that her psychology reveals its raw power, and you begin to understand that attraction, respect, and intrigue are as much about the mind as they are about emotion. You watch as her actions, once predictable, begin to bend under the subtle pressure of loss. She tests boundaries without conscious acknowledgement. She creates distance to gauge your constancy, and she measures your reactions with a precision that borders on unconscious artistry. Every gesture, every hesitation, every carefully weighted word becomes a window into her evolving valuation of you, and you recognize that she is both the architect and the audience of her own emotional theater. You sense that this is no longer a superficial interaction. It is a layered psychological play in which she assesses, recalibrates, and projects, all while maintaining the semblance of normalcy. You may notice her attempting to recreate your attention in moments of fleeting proximity, a silent experiment to see if the bond has eroded or if curiosity still anchors her to you. And yet, for every movement toward closeness, there's a corresponding retreat, a subtle withdrawal that hints at uncertainty, insecurity, and the lingering recognition of loss. She is navigating the delicate boundary between attachment and detachment, and in doing so, she exposes a universal truth, that the mind of a woman, when confronted with the reality of losing someone significant, operates not in overt drama, but in layered, precise, and almost imperceptible patterns. You realize that understanding this is not merely about observing behavior. It is about perceiving intention, anticipating reaction, and interpreting the silent calculus that drives her decisions. And as you sit with this awareness, you recognize a deeper truth about human connection itself, that attraction, attention, and emotional investment are never given freely without assessment, that curiosity and desire are entwined with perception and value, and that the subtle currents of her psychology are as decisive as the words she utters or the gestures she performs. You feel the weight of this knowledge pressing upon your own perception, compelling you to adjust, to calibrate, and to witness without interference, to understand without forcing, and to observe without judgment. In this space of quiet observation, you begin to see patterns emerge, the lingering glances, the sudden hesitations, the carefully timed approaches and withdrawals, all signals embedded in the texture of her behavior, all signs that her mind is at work, negotiating loss, desire, and curiosity simultaneously. You start to recognize that when she believes she has lost you, she does not merely react. She evolves her strategy, recalibrates her attention, and measures your value against the absence she now perceives. And in understanding this, you gain insight not only into her mind, but into the broader mechanisms of human psychology, the dance of attraction, and the profound ways in which attention, scarcity, and perception govern the architecture of desire. You recognize that the power she wields is quiet but undeniable, subtle but consequential, and it demands of you a level of presence, awareness, and composure that mirrors the very qualities she instinctively values. In this space, you do not chase, you do not demand, you simply observe. And through observation, you begin to understand the invisible strings that tie attention to curiosity, presence to intrigue, and absence to desire. And in the quiet gravity of her recalibration, you sense the ultimate lesson, that her mind, when confronted with the reality of losing someone meaningful, does not flinch in chaos but operates with a precision that is as natural as it is profound, and that your role is not to manipulate, but to witness, to measure, and to honor the patterns that unfold before you. You begin to understand the magnitude of what is unfolding. Her subtle withdrawals are not a punishment, nor are they a test in the conventional sense. They are a reflection of her internal valuation, a mirror of what she perceives as real, scarce, and precious. And you start to realize that every silent shift, every fleeting look, every carefully withheld word carries a weight that most men overlook. A weight that determines not only her emotional trajectory, but also the architecture of her attention, her desire, and ultimately, the way she perceives you. It is in these layers, these hidden structures of mind and emotion, that you grasp the silent artistry of female psychology, and you feel the shift in yourself, a new awareness, a heightened perception, a recognition of the invisible currents that guide her actions, her thoughts, and her silent calculations. You are no longer merely a participant in the dance of connection. You are a witness to the subtle laws that govern her mind, a student of patterns, a reader of invisible signs, and through this lens you begin to perceive her not as unpredictable, but as complex, precise, and profoundly human. As you continue to observe, you begin to notice the invisible architecture of her behavior, the way her mind navigates absence, scarcity, and the perception of loss. She is no longer reacting in the moment. She is anticipating, calculating, and subtly testing, all beneath the surface of casual conversation, beneath the smiles, beneath the laughter that now carries a trace of distance. You recognize that her actions are rarely arbitrary. Each pause, each fleeting touch, each glance that lingers and withdraws is a measure of your constancy, a probe into the contours of your presence. And in witnessing this, you realize that her psychology is a mirror, reflecting not only her desires, but also the value she assigns to what she fears is slipping away. You may feel the pull of curiosity, the urge to decipher her intentions, to fill the gaps in her silence with your own assumptions. But in this space, patience is your ally. To react hastily is to participate in a superficial narrative. To observe deeply is to perceive the underlying currents that most men miss. You begin to see that she alternates between approach and withdrawal, not as manipulation, but as instinct, a natural calibration of interest, attachment, and self-preservation. Her mind is quietly negotiating the landscape of emotional risk, testing boundaries, and assessing the potential consequences of your absence, all while maintaining a facade of composure that conceals the intensity of her internal storm. You start to notice patterns in the subtleties, the way she smiles when she imagines your reaction, the way her body leans forward only to retract as if pulled by an unseen force, the way her words carry layers of meaning beneath the surface. These are not random gestures. They are the language of her psychology, a syntax of attraction, curiosity, and value assessment. And in recognizing this, you understand that she is both the observer and the observed, both the actor and the audience conducting experiments in the quiet theater of her mind, all aimed at understanding what she has lost, what remains, and what is yet to be reclaimed. You realize that your presence has become a reference point in her internal world, a standard against which she measures desire, attachment, and attention. She may no longer express it openly, yet every subtle shift in her behavior is a reflection of the impact you have on her perception of herself and the world around her. In this delicate interplay, you understand that attraction is not simply a matter of words or gestures. It is a dynamic, continuously evolving process influenced as much by absence as by presence, by restraint as by engagement, and by perception as by reality. You begin to appreciate the precision with which she calibrates her actions. A pause in response is not indifference. It is assessment. A sudden smile is not mere warmth. It is measurement. A fleeting look toward you, quickly retracted, is not distraction. It is calculation. Her mind is attuned to the subtle fluctuations of attention and energy, and she adapts, in silence, to the shifts she perceives. You feel the gravity of understanding this. She is not acting out of impulse or caprice, but from a deep, instinctive awareness of value, loss, and emotional consequence. As you continue to observe, you notice a quiet transformation within yourself. Your perception sharpens, your understanding deepens, and you begin to see her not as a riddle to solve, but as a complex system to comprehend. You recognize that every instinct she exhibits, every hesitation, every recalibration is a manifestation of the interplay between her emotional intelligence and her perception of scarcity, attachment, and desire. And in grasping this, you sense that your own emotional and psychological mastery becomes intertwined with the rhythm of her mind, not as manipulation, but as comprehension, as alignment with the natural laws of attraction and attention. You notice her subtle attempts to gauge your response, the imperceptible shifts in tone and expression that reveal the question she asks herself about your presence. She wonders, silently, if you will remain consistent, if your interest will waver, if the attention she thought secure is now precarious. Each subtle movement is an experiment, and you are both subject and observer, witness to the unfolding of her internal calculus. You begin to recognize the duality of her behavior, the external semblance of calm and normalcy, and the internal architecture of assessment and emotional negotiation. This duality is what gives her psychology its depth, its complexity, and its quiet, almost imperceptible power. You feel the weight of awareness pressing upon you, the realization that understanding her requires more than observation. It requires presence, composure, and a willingness to witness the unfolding without interference. Her psychology is a living system, responsive to attention, energy, and emotional calibration. And as you engage with it, even as a detached observer, you find yourself participating in an invisible dialogue, a silent exchange of value, presence, and perception that transcends words and gestures. You begin to see how curiosity anchors her attention. When she senses a shift, a withdrawal, or an absence, her mind engages in a subtle but relentless evaluation. What remains of the bond? What is lost? What is regained? And what is yet possible? And in this, you realize that the true depth of her psychology is revealed not in dramatic displays, but in measured pauses, in the subtlest gestures, in the quiet adjustments she makes to navigate attachment, interest, and perceived scarcity. You notice the rhythm of her recalibration, a cyclical movement between approach and retreat, engagement and withdrawal, presence and absence. And within this rhythm lies the profound truth. She is measuring, assessing, and recalibrating not to manipulate, but to understand, to anticipate, and to reconcile the internal landscape of desire with the external reality of your presence. Each movement is deliberate, even if unconscious. Each pause is meaningful, even if fleeting. Each adjustment is a reflection of the intricate balance between attachment, value, and emotional awareness. As you sit with this observation, you sense the broader lesson. Her mind is not chaotic, not whimsical, not unpredictable. It is deliberate, nuanced, and responsive to patterns of attention and energy. Understanding this transforms your perception, compelling you to witness, reflect, and adjust your own behavior with clarity and composure. And in doing so, you begin to see the silent architecture of connection, the invisible principles that govern attention, attraction, and emotional investment, and the profound way in which the psychology of absence shapes the behavior of those we value most. There comes a moment when your awareness sharpens to a point where you no longer see her behavior as isolated fragments, but as part of a broader psychological landscape shaped by value, uncertainty, and emotional gravity. You begin to recognize that her reactions are not simply about you, but about what you represent in her internal world: stability, possibility, affirmation, or the fading echo of a connection she once trusted. And in this realization, you feel the quiet shift inside you. an understanding that goes beyond analysis and moves into mastery, into the calm territory where perception becomes power. You notice that as she senses the possibility of losing you, her entire emotional ecosystem reorganizes. She becomes more sensitive to subtle fluctuations in your tone, more alert to changes in your presence, more reflective in the way she engages. She begins to examine the memories she has with you, replaying them not as nostalgia, but as evidence in an internal trial where she is both judge and witness. Her mind evaluates the weight of what she fears slipping away, and in that evaluation, her behavior becomes a map of her deepest instincts. Instincts shaped by attachment, scarcity, and emotional survival. You observe that her silence now carries intention, not emptiness. It is space filled with questions she won't express directly, questions that circle through her mind in quiet spirals. What changed? What does your distance mean? Is this loss permanent? Her silence becomes a container for doubt, introspection, and longing, and within it, she begins to recalibrate how she sees you and how she sees herself. That recalibration is not dramatic or chaotic. It is measured, careful, almost surgical in its precision, revealing how deeply female psychology responds to shifts in perceived emotional security. As she reflects, you witness the emergence of subtle vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. It's not something she shows openly. It appears in micro-expressions, in the slight tremor of uncertainty behind her confidence, in the small pauses that replace the certainty she once held. You see it in the way she attempts to stabilize the connection through small gestures, a message that seems casual but carries weight, a look that lingers a fraction longer than before, a softening in her tone when she speaks. These gestures are the quiet indicators of her internal struggle, the instinctive attempt to regain psychological equilibrium in the shadow of loss. But alongside this vulnerability, you notice something else, a rising instinct for self-protection. When she believes she's losing you, her mind begins to build emotional contingencies. She may withdraw slightly, not out of indifference, but to brace for impact. She may create subtle distance, not as punishment, but as preparation for the possibility that you will not return to the emotional ground she once believed was stable. This dual movement, reaching out while pulling back, creates a psychological tension that defines her behavior, a balancing act between desire and defense. You begin to understand that the perceived loss of a man she values activates two opposing forces within her, the desire to re-establish connection and the instinct to protect her dignity. Her behavior becomes a negotiation between these forces, a dance of concealed emotions and unspoken evaluations. She becomes more selective with her words, more intentional with her attention, more deliberate in the way she presents herself. Her actions become quiet attempts to rediscover her own value in the mirror of your fading presence, a mirror she can't fully look away from. And as you observe this, something shifts within you. You start to see the deeper truth that underlies her psychology. Women do not respond to loss with chaos, they respond with meaning. Every action, every silence, every recalibration is connected to her inner architecture of attachment and identity. She is not reacting to you as a person alone. She is reacting to what the bond represents, what it reflects back about who she is allowed to be in your presence. Her behavior becomes a pathway into her emotional logic, a logic that is quiet, intuitive, and deeply rooted in the instinct to preserve value in the face of uncertainty. You sense that this understanding grants you a level of emotional composure that most men never reach. You no longer misinterpret her withdrawal as disinterest or her distance as coldness. You see the layers beneath, the uncertainty, the recalculation, the subtle longing concealed behind self-protective restraint. And in perceiving these layers, you feel your presence deepen into something steady, something grounded, something she can feel even when you say nothing. This steadiness becomes the final revelation. Women do not gravitate toward men who chase their uncertainty. They are drawn to men who remain composed in the face of emotional turbulence. Your calm becomes a gravitational field, a stabilizing force that influences her without controlling her. It is this presence, quiet, unwavering, and self-contained, that transforms the way she responds to the possibility of losing you. Because when a woman truly fears she's lost a man who carries himself with composure, depth, and emotional clarity, her psychology shifts from evaluation to recognition. She begins to see what she overlooked, to value what she took for granted, to feel the absence of the emotional certainty your presence once provided. This recognition is not loud or dramatic. It appears in small returns of vulnerability, in renewed softness, in the quiet reopening of emotional pathways that she once closed to protect herself. And in those moments, you understand the deeper truth. Her behavior in loss reveals who she becomes in reconnection. Her mind, shaped by reflection and recalibration, approaches you with a new awareness of your value, not because you demanded it, but because your steadiness allowed her to rediscover it on her own terms. This is where the transformation settles within you. You realize that mastering female psychology is not about predicting her behavior, but about understanding the invisible laws that shape it: presence, scarcity, emotional energy, and the meaning she attaches to your absence. By grasping these laws, you move into a realm of authority where your perception becomes power, your calm becomes influence, and your presence becomes the quiet force that shapes the dynamic without ever forcing it. And as this realization anchors itself within you, you feel something shift, a quiet ascent into emotional mastery, into the kind of masculine presence that does not just understand women, but understands the deeper architecture of connection itself.